Thank you, everyone. It's really great to be here. I hope you're all having a great show. My name is Mike Lee. I am a food product designer. I help food companies design products. And I want to talk to you today about the value of inspiration in the food system and in the food industry. My first inspiration was actually my grandfather. In 1940, he took a trip with him and his three brothers. They left Hong Kong, where they were living, and they moved to Detroit, Michigan, to open up one of the first Chinese restaurants in that city. And his friends in Toronto and San Francisco and places where there were Chinatowns thought he was crazy because they said, why are you going to Detroit? There's no one there like us. And he says, aha, precisely, that's why I'm going, because I don't have to compete with you. So early on in my life, I really was raised under this notion of you can see something that's not there, and if you have a vision, you can kind of create it from scratch. And that was a really powerful example that I grew up with and I was surrounded with in my young age. Fast forward a little bit more, and growing up in Detroit, one of the things you do is you just go to the auto show. That's sort of what you do. I'm not an auto freak, but I loved going not because of the regular cars that I saw, but I loved going because of this. Concept cars. I loved seeing that a big industry like the auto industry could create a concept that wasn't functional necessarily, wasn't for sale. It was just a way to push the boundaries of people's imagination in that industry. And in an industry that's just as big and capital intensive as the food industry. I thought that was really, really remarkable. Fast forward a little bit more to when I started working in food about 10 years ago, and I look at the grocery shelves and I wondered, where were the concepts? Where were the concepts and the ideas that were pushing the envelope, just like the automakers had been doing at the auto show every year? This sort of started to get my thoughts going, and it started to create a mantra for how we look at innovation in food. And that mantra is better innovation in food today starts with more ambitious thinking about tomorrow. More ambitious thinking about tomorrow, like the concept cars did for the auto show. This is why we created the Future Market. It's a concept grocery store that's full of products that are just that, concepts. Concepts that show a future of food that is better for people, planet, and profit. And this is what our mantra has become, is that we only work with companies and we only look at projects that can nail down something that's better for people, planet, and profit all at once. We're pretty good at getting all of one or two of these today, I think, in some products, but the goal is to get all of them in the future. This is what happens in food innovation at a large company. I see some head nods here, but as the bigger they get, the more risk-averse they become. This is also what happens, the journey of a food idea. You start off with this beautiful idea that looks like a triangle, and as it goes through a committee and a meeting and another committee, it sort of becomes more mass market. So we wanted to sort of buck the trend, and we said, how do we use concept products to inspire and illustrate the potential of new food ideas? It's really hard to create things in the system while you're running it. So we understand that, and so we said, how can we remove ourselves from the constraints of normal everyday commerce and say, can we create a concept that helps us jump ahead and think more ambitiously than we would have if we were just thinking about what's happening today? And that's what we did. We started to look at the Future Market exercise as sort of giving a telescope to the food industry. A telescope so that while you're sailing about, you can look ahead a few miles so that you can calibrate how you're moving today. Maybe we can make people move a little inch to the left instead of an inch to the right. That's really the goal of these concept products. Other industries do this implicitly. A search engine is now working on a self-driving car. Right? Because they're pushing the boundaries and they refuse to kind of box themselves into that original thing that they started doing. I don't need to explain the relevance of this, but the 800-pound gorilla has entered our industry, and from a cultural shift, it really lights a fire under all of our asses about innovation and how fast we should move in food. So I think this is going to have a lot of shockwaves coming in our industry. And it's all kind of in service of trying to make food better, especially some of the center aisles. We're all trying to inspire the industry to do better, and we're doing that through our concept products. We're opening here at the Javits Center. If you haven't checked us out, come by and stop. Literally 100 feet behind you is where the Future Market is sitting, where we have 22 concept products, a digital shopping system, and a customization engine that picks out which products are best for you. And these concept products are based off an exercise that we call amplifying weak signals. So a weak signal is a small trend or technology or behavior that we see today that is in its nascent stages. So take, for instance, the realm of cellular agriculture, growing meat in labs. It's a very early stage technology, but we have some concepts that wonder what happens when that weak signal becomes a strong signal and becomes a more mainstream idea. What would that look like on shelf? So we do things like looking at things like vertical farming as well too, and we say this is a shot of what AeroFarms looks like in New York, New Jersey. It's a really big, massive thing. What happens when the concept becomes something that can be fitting on your desktop? What happens when you can grow aeroponic produce on a really small format? What happens when you have something like uBiome, which tracks your microbiome, the microbes in your body? What happens when this, which requires a stool sample and a lot of time processing, becomes something that you can swallow in a pill and measure the inside of your body? So that's a weak signal that is amplified into the future. What happens when you take something as simple as pure as yogurt and you can take that and customize it to your own microbiome based off of data that you found with an Analyze Me pill? Or what happens when you take something around cellular agriculture, which is highly expensive and not even really proven right now, and you try to imagine what does that look like as a mass consumer product where you could cellular agriculture grow things like Wagyu steak and make it more available for people. So these are examples of what we do in a lot of our exercises. We take early stage trends and we amplify them into the future. One of the products that we do fits into this category of sustainability at scale. We're really big on trying to figure out how do we build scalable products that kind of reinforce a better way of agriculture that hits on that people, planet, profit goal. Three Sisters Polyculture Polenta is a product we created to kind of buck against the trend of monocultures. Most of the food system today is grown in a monoculture, where there's one plant grown in one plat of land, and it's very resource intensive, and it uses pesticides and fertilizers and things like that. That's mostly how agriculture is done today. 75% of the world's food is actually generated from 12 plants and 5 animal species. We're literally putting our eggs in one basket. You get things like the Irish potato famine when you have a monoculture gone awry. When you put all of your potatoes in one basket and one strain of blight can wipe out an entire crop, and the monoculture puts you at risk of famine. So we said, how might we design products that have empathy for nature? We spend a lot of times as food producers thinking about, oh, let's have empathy for the consumer or empathy for the user. We think a lot about that, but I would argue that the food industry doesn't always think about how do we have more empathy for nature in the food system that produces the things that we eat. How might we scale biodiversity? This is not typically the way that a lot of agriculture is done right now, but how might we create products that scale that? What if we replaced monoculture products with polyculture products? So we looked at something called Three Sisters, which I didn't invent. The American Indians have been doing this for centuries. But basically the Three Sisters are 3 plants, corn, beans, and squash. And they get planted together. The corn rises up and provides a stalk for the beans that climb up the corn, and the squash stays by the ground layer, keeping it shady and retaining water and repelling pests. It's a beautiful, elegant way of growing 3 plants together in a way that supports each other and reduces the need for pesticides and fertilizers and things like that. The biggest problem is nobody really plants this outside of their home garden. It's not really how agriculture is done on an industrial level. So we said, what if we created something that looked like a billion-dollar brand that could reinforce this way of agriculture? Because I would also posit that a lot of farmers are just going to really plant where the market's going and what they can sell. So can we shift demand around products that are good, nutritious, affordable for you, but also reinforce a better way of growing food on the farm? We previewed this concept in Italy at a conference called Seeds and Chips. You haven't lived until you've tried to sell polenta to Italians, trust me. The idea went really well, and I think it really speaks to this trend of food companies popping up with the system of food and agriculture in mind first, and then the consumer second. We also do experiences at retail. So Produce Pro is an experience that we created with a grocery store producer, or a produce distributor called Baldor, looking at the future of the produce department, which really hasn't changed much since the inception. We looked a lot earlier at things like open air markets, where you have people there and you can interact with them and you can have a great conversation about food. People love the farmer's market because of that reason. You can get the story behind your lettuce and you can get a story about what it's like to cook with it or what to do with it. This is something visceral that people really just gravitate towards. And yet you go into a normal grocery store and you don't have those experiences in the produce aisle. It's just the produce there and there's often no one really to talk to. We understand that it's probably unfeasible for every grocery store to put a doctor, a nutritionist, a chef in the aisles, so we said, how can we use off-the-shelf technology, two-way video chat, and create a telepresence system that goes inside of a produce stand? So we mocked this up right now, and it's a functioning prototype that we did, but essentially what happens is there's a two-way touchscreen with video on it, and you push a button, you can hold up a piece of produce and say, what do I do with this? Or where did this come from? Or tell me about the vitamin content into it. So we designed it sort of like a call center where you could have a number of people in one location talking to multiple retail chains through video chat. So really easy off-the-shelf technology, but it changes the dynamic of what it means to shop for produce in a store. This was actually piloted also at the Whole Foods in Williamsburg, and it was featured in the Wall Street Journal. Finally, we also do dinners. We use dinners a lot because dinners are a way for us to explain really heady concepts in the food system in a very visceral way that everybody understands. You may or may not understand a chart or an infographic that you read about, but everybody really kind of on some level understands what they're eating in front of them on the plate. So we call the dinners really a repository for these edible memes. We did a dinner last summer called The Future of Protein, where we looked at 10-year intervals of how people produced and consumed protein from the year 1850 all the way to the year 2065. Our dishes to the average viewer look like just dishes on a menu, but for us we call them edible artifacts. They're edible artifacts of the past, present, and future. And again, like I said, they're really in the interest of bringing food systems issues down to human scale. Food is really fascinating because it's one of the biggest daunting production systems in the world, but yet it ends in the most intimate system possible, which is just right in your mouth and on your plate. So we had a 270-degree video surround sound spectrum where we created images that took you to a different place, and each dish took you to a different era. So the 1950s, we want to talk about the Green Revolution and the rise of processed foods. So we recreated the TV dinner. This is a Salisbury steak with vegetables, but instead of old school ingredients, we used grass-fed local meat and heirloom vegetables. And we wanted to play off nostalgia, but see how nostalgia can be reinvented. We wanted to show issues around sustainability and issues beyond the energy use between plants and animals. This is 58 ounces of vegetables, which people were served family style, and everybody got a 1-ounce slice of ribeye. So this contrast is what we wanted to bring up, because these two things take about the same amount of gasoline equivalent energy to create. And we wanted to etch this memory in people's minds. Whenever they saw a big juicy steak, they could kind of maybe remember, oh, I could get a lot of vegetables for that amount of beef. And then a lot of times what we do with trends that are happening today is we like to imagine what that trend looks like when it becomes boring. Because I think that's a really good indicator of when something's really sunk into society, is when it's become mundane and just kind of average. We looked at things like insect protein, which people kind of think is kind of sexy and kind of scary right now, but we said, what happens if this thing becomes totally boring and mundane and you're just eating insect protein in your everyday meals? So we thought, what's the most comfortable thing we could possibly make? Pasta and bolognese sauce with bread. This pasta is made from 70% cricket flour, the bolognese sauce is made from mealworms, and the bread is made from half cricket flour as well too. So we wanted to ball something up that was really kind of scary into something that's very familiar and easy to kind of digest. Better innovation in food today starts with more ambitious thinking about tomorrow. This is the mantra of everything we do with the future market, with our experiences, and with our activations in retail. I'll leave you with one last anecdote that really inspired what we want to do and really illustrates how we want to inspire the food industry, and that's the anecdote with this guy, Martin Cooper. You may not know his name, but you know his invention. He was the head of R&D at Motorola in the 70s, and he invented the cell phone. His team invented the first prototype, which you see in his hand, and I don't need to tell you how much this has changed our lives. My favorite part about that story is that Martin Cooper's gone on record saying that he was inspired by Captain Kirk and Captain Kirk's communicator when he designed the cell phone. And that really just took me aback, because I wonder what the possibilities could be when you combine somebody with the wherewithal and the talent and the resources to create something that was inspired by science fiction that had no boundaries. And could you actually use things that were conceptual in science fiction to inspire real innovation in the real food system? This is the goal of what we want to do with the Future Market. This is the goal of what we want to do with Alpha Food Labs, the innovation platform that my wife and I have launched. This is the goal of what we want to do, is to create more connections like this between Martin Coopers and the Captain Kirks of the world, and we hope to do this more in food. Thank you very much.